of my sister and my mother and all of our family to thank all of you for coming. Your support and love means a great deal to us at this time. I was doing pretty well with my father's passing, because I have to say it was his time. But now, with all of you coming in and greeting and sharing your affection and your love for him and for us, it's gotten to me. But I thank you. We're gathered here to honor the life and memory of John Shafran. Death has come to him as it does to all persons. Death brings to our minds and hearts the common concerns and shared destiny of humankind. We are drawn together by deep felt emotions, and we are reminded of the essential community that lies beneath the many differences and divisions of humanity on earth. Our lives and the lives of our loved ones are rooted in a profound mystery beyond our understanding. In the face of eternity, we are made simple. Though we know our destiny is to tarry but a while, the time of separation brings anguish and grief. May we bear our burden bravely. May we struggle through the darkness with courage to find our way again. Out of the abundant richness of the universal flow, we receive the loved one whose end has come. We shared blessings with him in great and generous measure. From the depths of our hearts, we're grateful for the years of life and joy, his love answering to ours, his companionship responding to ours, brought warmth and gladness to our days. We cherish that love and companionship, though he be gone, and we will reverently keep his remembrance in the treasure house of our minds. We seek strength to go our way with fortitude and to do our tasks day by day. Let the memory of our dear one live on in us to inspire service and kindness, and thus endure for a blessing. And above all, may this time of sorrow guide us to a heart of wisdom, to know that all things, great and small, must come to an end of days. Can everybody hear me? Eulogies are never easy. And as you might imagine, this one is a little bit more difficult than most of the others I've had to give. Not only because of the obvious emotional potency of the moment, but for another reason that you might not really imagine. Usually you know so little about the person that you're eulogizing that you basically take everything the family tells you and there's your speech. And that's not the case here. I know so much about the person being eulogized that the challenge becomes, well, where do I begin? And how do I winnow down a lifetime of events and all my richness of my memory into a few little nuggets that might begin to give you a tiny picture of who my father was. If I had to describe my father in one sentence, I would say that he was a quiet, gentle, simple man. Not simplistic, simple. He anchored his life around a very few guiding principles, and he wasn't distracted by the novelties and the noise of our society and our culture. I would say that they were love of nature, a deep sense of civic duty, and love of family. Like I said, there's nothing flashy here, but it's solid and it's grounded. He liked quiet pursuits. He liked hiking and walking on the beach and collecting rocks and pebbles, which he later polished, only because he found them pretty, not because they had any value. My dad developed trench foot during the war, and his feet hurt him for the rest of his life. I can't tell you the extent to which that colored his character or shaped or limited his activities, but I have a sense that he would not have been a skier or a tennis player even if his feet had allowed him to do so. His feet did allow him to hike, and he and my mother took many wonderful hikes through the mountains when they traveled out west and other places. Said a great love of nature. Picnics were some of my earliest memories in South Chagrin Reservation. Our family vacations were in cabins in state parks. It's true that was probably all we could afford to do at that point in time, but I think it would have been his preference even if we could have afforded more. As the saying goes, happy the man who doesn't want what he can't have. He loved gardening. One of his nicknames was Farmer John because his gardens were sort of a cross between a victory garden and a truck farm. They were big gardens, and he planned them meticulously. When my parents moved to Myers, and I was going through their stuff, I found a box of all of his garden diagrams. He diagrammed all his gardens on, the accounting spreadsheet paper that he used meticulously, and he started all his own seeds under grow lights. I remember the Burpee catalog coming was a big event at some points. We ate real good from his gardens, and we got very spoiled with regard to fresh produce, especially tomatoes. Just if you had a tomato that you picked that warm from the sun, it's just right. It was a whole different animal than anything you could get anywhere else. And we were very snobbish about sweet corn. We would steam it then. It was before microwaves, and you weren't allowed to pick the corn until the water in the pot was boiling. But he clearly enjoyed working the earth, and I think he enjoyed the quiet and the peace of gardening. You can't undertake something that requires that much patience and that much attention to detail unless you really love it. My dad loved animals. There were bird feeders and hummingbird feeders, and he fed the squirrels more than he fed the birds. He used to plant extra for the deer in his garden. Plant a couple rows extra, the deer will eat too, He loved animals, especially cats and dogs, and he had quite a string of exceptional cats that really took to him. I used to joke that when I died, I wanted to come back as one of my father's cats, because there was not a creature on the face of the planet that was more spoiled, believe me. My dad had a very, very strong sense of civic duty. It's important to remember that he was an immigrant. He came here when he was 5 years old. He was born in France. His parents were leaving Russia and caught up in the quota system and had to spend some time outside of our shores. And I think my father appreciated this country in a way that perhaps only an immigrant can, or at least could at that point in time. I don't know how immigrants perceive our country now. It's quite a different picture. After high school, he volunteered for the Army. He was not a citizen at the time. He would not have been drafted. But he felt he had to put himself in harm's way in order to combat this manifest evil. And he was in the second wave of the Normandy invasion. After the beaches were secured, they went in and sent the infantry into the forests behind, and that's where he did his fighting. After the war, he finished college on the GI Bill, and he chose to work for the Internal Revenue Service. This was a decision which was based on many factors. One, as my sister pointed out, it was job security with great benefits. He did retire with full pension at the age of 54 because he put in his 30 years, started a whole different career as an attorney. It allowed him to be home and take an active part in the life of his family and his children. He was always there, and that was very, very important to him. Part of it was determined by the fact that Jewish accountants weren't welcome in the established firms back in the early 50s. But he also very much believed in that government could and must play a role for good in helping to shape society, and that there were things that we could do as a society that we could only do as a society that were worth doing. And he saw that. He saw that in the public works projects when he was younger. He saw that in the social security system. He saw that in the GI Bill, in the infrastructure boom, in the Marshall Plan. He saw government and its bureaucracy as a fundamentally good thing. And he considered it a privilege to vote, and he considered it a privilege to pay taxes. We had a joke that if you wanted your taxes done, don't go to my dad, because his approach, instead of trying to find you every loophole and tax haven, was to try and find every penny you could possibly legally pay to the IRS and pay it. My dad believed he had to give back, and he did. He was a checkbook activist. He supported everything. My parents got 3 times as much mail as any other 2 households I've ever seen, and he supported everything. ACLU, Southern Poverty Law Center, Amnesty International, ADL, UNICEF, every medical society, cancer, MS, muscular dystrophy, diabetes, Doctors Without Borders, every environmental cause, the Sierra Club, Wilderness Foundation, the Oceanographic Institute, Jewish Federation, this orphanage, that orphanage, this immigrant resettlement fund. I will tell you later that if you wanted to make a contribution in his memory, you should do so to the charity of your choice. Chances are he will have contributed to it at some point. He was a blood donor. He was a member of the Gallon Club several times over, if I'm not mistaken. He just gave regularly. He was a liberal in his politics, and he was a liberal in his personal life. He was a step in to help level the playing field for all, to assure equal opportunity for all. He was honest and hardworking, and for him they were the same thing. If you were doing a job and you gave less than your best, you were cheating. Barbara reminded me that he would bring pencils home from work and graph paper to do his work at home, and we wanted, some. No, not a piece of paper, not a paper clip, not a pencil. That would have been stealing. He was tolerant. He grew, I think, increasingly tolerant and open-minded as he aged. He supported and encouraged my mother in her singing career. He was the one who really pushed her to study and develop her voice and go out and perform and do all that stuff outside the house in a time when it wasn't traditional for a woman to do that, go be in plays and kiss strange men on stage. But I caution you against thinking that he was a thoroughly liberated man. That would be going a little too far. He was very proud of the fact that he had never ironed a shirt in his life and that he couldn't cook a meal to save his life. So, in fact, the anecdote I have to share is that, this was probably 20 years ago. We were having dinner, and my mother's running around putting food on the table, and my father's sitting there. And, Gloria, there's no salt on the table. And she said, "You're not crippled. You have legs." And then she got him the salt. And I said to him, "Dad, you better go first, because nobody's taking care of you the way Mom's taking care of you." And he said, I have every intention. And he made good on his word. Which brings us to family. My father was devoted to his family. He was a devoted son. I vividly remember going to my grandmother's house every week when she was done baking the bread. Then you'll come for the bread. For the whole family. And watching my fairly assimilated father transform from John Shafran into Zalman, which was his given name, and in Yiddish, help his parents navigate the arcane byways of citizenship that a language barrier made very, very difficult to navigate. And I always felt like that it lent him a little bit of an air of mystery, and made him a little bit exotic, that he had this dual identity. He was always there for Barbara and I, for Barbara and me. From tickling us on the couch when we were toddlers to playing card games with us when he was dead tired from working and going to law school at night. He drove us to all our music lessons, to our Sunday school. He was there for all of our graduations, all of our recitals, all of our school plays. He valued those things. He insisted that we eat breakfast together as a family. And so from kindergarten on, we all got up at 5:45 every morning so that we could sit down to a set table and have a cooked breakfast as a family and give him time to walk to the bus stop and go downtown and get to work on time. That went on till high school, into high school. I think I finally rebelled my senior year. I said, no, enough. He loved his grandchildren. He loved Abe and Jean. They spent a lot of time at Grandma and Grandpa's in their younger days. And my children, Rachel and Ben, my parents were even more instrumental in their upbringing. We never sent them to daycare. They went to Grandma and Grandpa camp. And they were just wonderful, wonderful. He took delight in all of his many beautiful, wonderful great-grandchildren. He was a good uncle. He was a good brother-in-law. He was a good friend. But by far, the most significant single factor in his life, and the thing that more than anything defined him as a person, was his relationship with Gloria. That's just a fact. They met. My father was a friend of a man named Neelan Nair, who later became my uncle when he married Gloria's sister, my Aunt Alice. And he used to visit. And as my Aunt Alice tells the story, one day as they said goodbye to Johnny and closed the door, she turned to Neelan and said, "You know, I don't think he's coming to visit us anymore." So they were married at, she was 19, he was 23. 2 years later, they had 2 kids. And what can I tell you? Those of you who knew my parents, who know them, you know the kind of relationship they had. And those of you who didn't know them, I cannot begin to tell you the kind of devotion and love and consideration and joy that they took in each other. My dad slipped cognitively as well as physically over the last few years. My mother cared for him with such attention and such love and such compassion that would put Mother Teresa to shame. And it clearly placed a burden on her. It taxed her physical resources, and it limited her activities. But I can tell you without a doubt that it brought her so much joy and so much contentment and so much fulfillment, she wouldn't have traded it for all the freedom and comfort in the world. No matter how much he slipped cognitively, my father never lost sight of Gloria. He wouldn't recognize me sometimes. He wouldn't know what day it was. He wouldn't know where it was. But he never lost my mother. She was his pole star. She was that one beacon of consciousness that couldn't be dimmed by age or frailty or dementia. The last words he ever said were to my mother, and they were, "I love you." And he used his dwindling reserves of energy and strength in the last days of his life to say them over and over and over and over again, every time he opened his eyes. I could go on and on. I could say much more, especially of my indebtedness to him. From him I got much of my sense of humor. I got my love of nature, including his great love for cats and dogs and his deep affinity for those amazing life forms. I got a sense of honesty and decency and Menschlichkeit. He taught me how to till the soil and how to tie up and prune a tomato plant and how much water things needed. He taught me how to keep my own counsel, how to hold my tongue and not argue with fools. And he taught me how to hold my liquor, which was a good lesson to teach your son. I watched my father consume prodigious quantities of scotch and never break character. So I knew it was possible to do. He was a good man. And he lived a good life, a long life, a full life, a rich life. Almost 71 years of loving marriage, nearly 95 at death, died at home, surrounded by his family, with his Gloria holding his hand. I'll take that. I'll take that. My nephew Gene Gross has some words that he wants to, some thoughts he wants to share. But before I bring him up, I want to extend a very, very special thank you to the people who took care of my dad at the end of life. The Vinnie Hospice of Montefiore couldn't have been more considerate, more compassionate, or more responsive. They were wonderful. But the superstars were this group of private caregivers that we had who were just unbelievable. Pebbles, Joanne, Betty, and most of all, Ori Hernandez and Melissa Kennedy. Melissa Kennedy, who was there at the beginning and who was there at the end, was just amazing. They provided my father with the best care you could possibly imagine. He didn't blink, but somebody was there to make sure that he was as comfortable as he could be, and they gifted us with a very gentle, compassionate, loving passing, and the peace of mind that he was in the best hands he could be in. So I wanted to make that clear. Gene?
I want to say a few words about my grandpa Johnny, as I always knew him. My Uncle Bob described him as gentle and quiet, and that's how I always knew him. And I want to add to that that he was a thinker. And I'll say more about that in a second, but first I want to say that my Grandpa John was someone that I admired tremendously. I don't admire a lot of people. And I have always admired him deeply ever since I was a child, and today all the more. And everything about myself, I see a lot of the good that I see in myself, I see as being traced back to him, and in ways that I can't even put into words, really. So I want to talk about him being gentle and quiet, and I want to talk about him being a thinker. When I was a kid, and really until I was a young adult, I thought my grandpa was kind of a teddy bear, because, you know, a lot of the same memories. I remember him playing cards with us. I remember, you know, spreading out the blanket in front of the fireplace with the cats and having ice cream. And I remember him tickling, you know, us. And I have a very particular memory of a game we used to play. He would draw letters and numbers on our backs, and we would guess what it was. And then when we got a little older, we'd guess he'd draw words and sentences. And it was a very dear and gentle. You know, I remember his kind of thick hands with his, you know, hairy knuckles, and, you know, on my little child back. And he was just this gentle, quiet person. And then the first inkling that I got that he was such a deep thinker with very strong opinions that he nonetheless expressed in very measured, gentle ways was when I turned 21. And my brother, whose birthday is 2 days off from mine, turned 19, and we got a letter, which I just produced. I'll read it for some of you if you'd like, but I'll summarize. He basically said, Dear Gene and Abe, you're 19 and 21. I can't help but think when I was 19, I was in France fighting the Germans. And when I was 21, I came home and I was feeling great, but I didn't know what my life was going to be like. And he went on to talk about, used words like peace and liberty and prosperity and security of food, and had this very intellectual letter, which I treasure. And of course signed it, with "Love, Your Grandfather," and it was on yellow legal paper with a felt tip pen. So that was the first inkling that I got that he was, that there was a lot going on. And then the second inkling I got was when I got married a few years later, and I had asked him to speak at one of the Shavuot and when we got to the dinner, my Grandma Gloria said to me, he didn't sleep at all last night, and she was not kidding. He had been up, I think, the entire night, thinking and rehearsing, and of course, when the time came, he unfolded his yellow legal paper, and read off the legal paper. But it was a profound message. It was your whole life is different now. You're a unit, and everything you do has to be with that in mind. When you wake up in the morning to when you go to sleep. And that's when I realized that my grandpa was not only gentle and kind and quiet, but had all this vitality and all of this life and all of these thoughts and all of these strong opinions, but he was measured. And that's what my grandma said was one of the things that made her fall in love with him, was that she would overhear him talking with Alice and Neelan, and the way she tells the story, at least the way I remember it, is that he would listen. And then after everyone else had talked and debated, and he would say, okay, this is what I think. And that's something I admire. And the other thing that I was just reminded of when my Uncle Bob was talking is that my grandfather was an assimilated Jew. He would talk about being an atheist. But boy, was he Jewish. He was so Jewish. And that really that hits me really hard. There's something about my grandpa, and my grandma and many other people, but we're talking about my grandpa, and that communicated to me that being Jewish is something that you are, not necessarily something that you choose, not necessarily something that you do. That's been extremely important to me, and still is. And I want to close with one story. My Uncle Bob has talked about how precious my grandma and grandpa's relationship was, and what an example it was and is. And about 2 years ago, I visited my grandma and grandpa, and had some questions for my grandma. And I said, how'd you do that? How do you guys do this? And my grandma, said, well, we got lucky, mostly. And I don't think that's entirely true, but, they did get lucky. They chose well. And then I said, but, what else? And my grandma said something to me that just is one of the most important things that I know. And she said, in life, she said, we got married very young. In life, we had kids right away. We lived with grandpa's parents for a year, 2. And she said, in life, it's just twists and turns. You keep rounding corners. and there's you have a child, and it's a new set of demands, and then et cetera, et cetera. You keep rounding corners. And she said every single time we rounded a corner, and I would think to myself, boy, are we going to do this? Are we going to be able to do this? And she said he always, and I'm using my own words here, but he always stepped up every single time. And that's why we're so happy, because he always did what it took to be good and to rise to the challenge and to be good to me. So Grandpa, will be thinking about you for a long time.
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo yachzor, binois deshe yarbitzeini, ame menuchos yenaleini. Nafshi yishoy v'yancheini b'magvei tzedek leman shemoi, gam ki eilech begeit amo v'esleiroro ki ato imodi. Shiv d'chumi shantecha, hey me yenachamuni, taroich lefonai shulchan neged tzoyroi, di shanto v'shemen roi shikoisi revoyo, ach toi v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayoi, v'shavdi beveis Adonai le'oirech yomim. A Psalm of David. Hashem is my shepherd, I shall not lack. In lush meadows, he lays me down. Beside tranquil waters, he leads me. He restores my soul. He leads me on paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Though I walk in the valley, overshadowed by death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they cover me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my tormentors. You anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Hashem for long days. I suppose it's a credit, and it speaks. To the truth of all the qualities of my grandfather that were spoken about, that I was about to say pretty much the same thing. So, even though it's repetitive, but at least it's from my vantage point, I was not aware, I wasn't planning on saying this, I wasn't aware of the fact that the entire family woke up so early to have breakfast together. But no doubt that went down into his children. And as a result, when I used to leave for school at 5:45 in the morning, my mother would eat breakfast with me at 5:25 in the morning. We find an amazing thing, that if one looks at all of the leaders, or many of the leaders of the Jewish people, one of the things you find is that they were shepherds. They took care of animals. And the Talmud goes into length to express that they weren't just shepherds, they took care of them in a way that was caring. They made sure that the young, tender animals were able to eat before the older ones so that they shouldn't be bullied around. And that was what proved their ability in order to lead the Jewish people. My grandfather was not only true, yes, he took care of his animals with tremendous love, but his grandchildren and his children and his wife with much more, it's hard to say that, but with tremendous love. Another quality, as also again was already spoken about, was the tremendous honesty and the tremendous just being a straight person. What he held, what he felt was what he expressed. There was no airs about him. And he was exactly whatever he felt in his heart was what he expressed in measure. But that was what he expressed. I'm extremely grateful that unlike it is nowadays where we find that families are spread apart all across the globe, all through the United States, you know, I merited to be able to grow up with my grandparents. And because of this, I, like my brother, Gene had said, I was shaped tremendously by all of his qualities. There was one time, I remember I was speaking by a birthday party that we invited the whole family to, his Upshirin, and I was speaking about the importance of family, and he came over to me, and at that time I was living in Israel, and he came over to me afterwards, and he said, so when are you moving back? You know? But we all took that with tremendous love. It wasn't misunderstood as being judgmental. He would say his piece, and we would do what we felt was right. It's interesting that, you know, all the games that were mentioned, you know, with the finger on the back, it's literally, again, I'm being repetitious, but I was just thinking this morning of the finger on my back, making the letters. I don't know if I graduated to words. I don't know if I remember that. Could be you were a better reader than I was. I don't remember. But this is going back a few years. But, you know, the fact that we feel, even to this moment, probably around 35 years later, you know, attests to the tremendous love that was behind the finger and that was, you know, in everything that he did. I wish I could learn from some of that gentleness. We were speaking on the way here even about the fact that, you know, his voice was never raised. I wish that I could get through the day with the amount of times that he raised his voice in his entire life. And so what we're left with is a lot of memories, but more important, we can take the qualities, these qualities, which he put in us and will never leave. And that is how his memory will be left. And not only the things that he put into us, but also the things which we can make an effort to try to emulate those qualities from now on. El moli rachamim shechein b'amroimim Hamtzei menucha nechoino al kanfei hashechino b'ma'alois kedoshim u'tohirim kezoyar harakia mazirim Es nishmas Zalman ben Avraham sholach lo ilomoy bavur shekol hakol mispalm bavuroi Began Eden tehei menuchosoi lochein balo rachamim yasireu v'seiser kenofav lo ilomim v'yitzror rachayim es nishmosoi Adonai hu nachalosoi v'yonuach v'sholom amishkovoi v'noimar omein. O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence and the lofty levels of the holy and the pure ones who shine like the glow of the firmament for the soul of Zalman, the son of Avram, who went on to his world. May his resting place be in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. Therefore, may the Master of the mercy shelter him in the shelter of his wings for eternity. And may he bind his soul in the bond of life. Hashem is his heritage, and may he repose in peace on his resting place. And let us say, Amen.